This session is all about finance policy and the systemic shift that is needed to accelerate a just transition. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today and learn more about how we can move towards solutions that actually support people, communities, and also long-term economic resilience. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my session partners. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. We would like, because one of our speakers needs to leave early, so we actually have a very special thing. We want to take a quick picture. So can I ask you all to come on stage quickly? And we take the picture now. We can just stand here in the front. Okay. Send to all. Okay, super. Thank you.
Should I stay?
I'll hand it over to you, Katarina.
Yes.
Am I working? Yes. Yes, very good. So my name is Katarina Wangler-Björk. I'm the Chief Impact Officer of Exponential Roadmap Initiative, which is an exponential think tank and corporate network accelerating climate action with both large corporates, but also the climate solutions that we see to enable this economy. And I'm very pleased to be here. Let's see, now we have, should I be over there? We'll see. I thought I was here, but anyway. So I'd like to start with inviting the brilliant leaders and speakers that we have to discuss this question. And I mean, it's not a question, it's a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity, and it's a choice. Also, given that we are here when in the center of geopolitics at the moment, we have a choice to be determined. We have a choice to look up for each other and find new solutions, new partnerships. And I think that is what is going on, and that is what's important when we're here. And we are going to deep dive into those topics with the brilliant leaders that we have at hand for this conversation. And now I need to remember my son's password to the anyway, so I'd like you to join me on stage one-on-one. I have Anne-Sophie Castelnau, Head of Sustainability, Global Head of Sustainability at ING. Much welcome up on stage. Looking forward to this conversation. I have Dr. Amiera Sawas, Head of Research and Policy at Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Much welcome up to the stage with me as well. And Martin Rohner, Executive Director, Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Please join me on stage. And also the arranger and organizer of this panel. And finally, Ingmar Rentzhog, the CEO and co-founder of We Don't Have Time, and a lot of other things. Yes. And to start off, I tried to follow the news and reports that are launched during this week, but there's so much going on. But anyway, the other day there was a new report launched looking at that there's only 32 companies that stands behind 50% of the fossil fuel emissions. And that has decreased only the last couple of years from 36. Also interesting for this conversation is that many of those companies are owned by countries, which also puts a spot on why is this such a difficult challenge? Why does it play out in the COP30, for example, where we had an initiative on how to phase out fossil fuels, but we had 80 countries supporting that, but we had a lot of countries opposing it as well. So why is policy and collaboration between countries important, and also companies and business, and the finance issue, of course. But that is one part of the side. I think that is important, both looking at when we talk about global headwinds, it's not always global. We have a lot of positive things happening in the world as well. So we need to see that there's parallel tracks. There are different futures that we can choose from, futures that really belong to history and futures that could be a well-being society for all. We did, with Exponential Roadmap, launch a paper a month ago on crocodile economics, where we identified a lot of countries and a lot of companies that actually have succeeded in decoupling emissions and financial performance, or GDP. So we can see that there is a positive pattern, and we need to focus on how could this be done? How can we accelerate those positive developments? How can we scale the solutions? How can we scale the right policies, etc.? And that is what I want to deep dive into. So how can we create an earth-positive economy and go to a post-fossil fuel economy, but more focus on the positive sides? And how can we make that happen while we're here? We still have 2 days to go. Yes. So with that, we're going to start with these speakers and leaders to introduce themselves and what you bring to the table and what you see and how you work, each one of you. And after that, we're going to have a conversation, all of us here, but also after a while invite you to ask questions. And we will end on a note where we probably have some actionable insights. With that, I'd like to introduce Ingmar Rentzhog. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Katarina. And I was told here in the green room by Martin, we need to be positive, focus on the solutions. I will not start by being positive, because I think we need to face the reality. I mean, the geopolitics and what's going on here in World Economic Forum at the center of everything is not really positive at all. We live in very troubled times. And it's very much fueled by those that wants to stay in power. And as you said, there's not many. It's a special interest of very few companies, leaders, and some countries. But they have huge influence. And they have been using this influence for many, many years, for decades. They have always tried to deny climate change, get people to believe that there is some kind of debate, or as Donald Trump says, it's a scam. We are all scammers in this room. But that doesn't really work, because people can feel that the weather is very sick outside, and you don't believe that anymore. So they have moved on and changed strategy, saying that, yeah, we need to change, but we can do that when I'm not in power, or when I'm dead in 2050 or something. But that strategy is not working either, because the economy are changing. So if you're an oil CEO, you're very worried that no one will buy your fuel, because cars are now electric. 100% of all cars sold in Norway were electric last year. And that's an oil country, so something is happening here. But this means that what we feel now is that they are getting desperate. So what are they doing? They actually try to cancel science itself. That's where we are right now. And it's not just talk. I mean, it's very worrisome. If you talk to scientists in the United States, they are fleeing the country. They are taking the data with them to Europe to save it, literally. When we were in New York for Climate Week, we talked to scientists that said that we have the suitcase packed, we're ready to leave the country. And some have already done that. If we focus on climate, there is an observatory in the United States, in Hawaii, the Mauna Loa Observatory. How many in here have heard about that observatory? Almost everyone. It's the ground zero where you measure carbon dioxide every single day since the 1960s. And it's going up, it's record high, we all know that. So what are the US administration doing about that? They try to cancel and shut down the observatory. And they also shut down and burn up satellites, because they don't like the climate data they provide. And it's not just the United States, it's coming to Europe as well. In Germany, AfD wants to tear down all wind power plants because they're ugly. In United Kingdom, I just read an analysis that most media has been positive to transitioning. They are now, a majority are negative. So the information war are actually happening. And that's really dangerous. So why is this happening? It's happening because fossil fuel are starting to lose. We're now at a shift. Last year, clean energy were actually surpassing fossil fuel and all other energy in electricity production. 96% of all new electricity in the United States are fossil free. And if you see the economy, $5 trillion are invested in clean energy. And according to World Economic Forum, that will grow to 7 trillion in just a couple of years. That's about 7% of all money that goes around in the world are now going into clean energy. And this backlash we feel here in Europe, many companies are maybe still doing climate action, but they don't dare to speak about it because they can be hurt by Donald Trump. But this is a thing here in US and Europe. If you go to China, they're not stopping. They are accelerating green solutions. If you go to the Middle East, same thing there. They're investing billions into green transition. So what we need to consider here, what we need to see, we feel the resistance because we're starting to break through. But I'm very worried that we are not going to make that breakthrough. Because if most people are not aware of this, we will not get through. And what we see now is US and other powerhouses, they try to control the information. And if they succeed with that, we will never break through. So now is the time to work harder than ever. Our job is so important because we just need to keep pushing harder and we will break through. But in order to do that, we need free media. And today, if you see just Europe, we don't even have our own social media, for example. So that's one reason why I'm here in Davos. We've actually launched and presented a social media that will be coming here in Europe later this year. That's just one thing we need to do. But overall, we just need to keep pushing and make our money invest in the solution.
Thank you very much, Ingmar. And I'd like to ask if we can have the timer on so it makes it easier for us before we go further on. Thank you. Amiera, please introduce yourself and why you're here and your work.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope so. My name's Amiera. I'm the head of research and policy at the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, which is basically an effort to address some of the challenges that have just been highlighted. But I think before I tell you about the initiative, I think acknowledging the context is really important, and acknowledging the agency and role we all have in this context is also really important. So we're going to look back in a few years and probably think, oh my goodness, I was right in the middle of witnessing this like global turning point in power dynamics, right? And I feel like we just can't put our heads in the sand anymore, or we can't expect that others are going to deal with it, because this is going to require a lot more than individual sectors, individual governments, individual communities to address it. And we're going down this fragmented path. We're seeing an increasingly polarized debate, which is being captured by negative forces. And ultimately, the end of this is going to be not only, of course, in the long term, the world effectively burning up, but all along the way, the majority of the world will suffer more and more, not just from climate change and environmental degradation, but the conflict and insecurity, which is deeply tied to the fossil fuel industry, the lobby, and so on. So we can continue going down that way, or we can choose a different path, a path that actually the Swiss president, Pamela, hopefully pronounced that correctly, said in his speech this week, which is we need society, science, economics, and a spirit of partnership with politics working together. Otherwise, problems can only be addressed in a partial and imperfect manner. And I think many of you know that even the topic of fossil fuels only made it into the UNFCCC climate negotiation space very recently. So we're in a situation where we need all hands on deck, and we need to realize that no country, no sector, no individual stakeholder can do it alone. And particularly the climate environmental movement, which has not been super diverse in the past, right? So we've struggled to speak to those people who are being captured by the right-wing narratives. And I'm not undermining the role of the media in this. The media, the corporate media, the right-wing media is absolutely huge. But I did work for 3 years doing research with people who have been taken by those narratives, and we're just not doing a good enough job of engaging people in the story of like the future, like what we can do differently, why we need this transition and how they're a part of it, what it's going to do for them. We're just not doing that. So at the Treaty Initiative, we believe that we can be a part of this different path, which is a vast, just, democratic global transition to a fossil-free world, which is an ideal that lots of people are thinking about right now, right? But we don't actually have a plan. So we are thinking about, like, the plan that we have is basically premised on 3 pillars, which are ending the expansion of new fossil fuel projects, because we can't keep growing the problem, right? At the moment, we have 120% more fossil fuel projects planned than is actually compatible with the 1.5 degree warming threshold that we all agreed to under the Paris Agreement. We've actually breached that, so we kind of need to come back from that as well. So we can't keep building the problem. We need to phase out existing projects in an equitable way. So that means recognizing that there are different players in the world that have different levels of responsibility and capacity and need different kinds of support. So we have to phase down in line with global justice and equity. And we also have to enable and support a just transition within those contexts for workers, communities, economies, and businesses, so everyone can feel like they're part of this solution, right? Part of this story. So these pillars make up the basis of a global work plan, which is complementary to the UNFCCC process, because the UNFCCC in its Paris Agreement told us what we need to do, but it doesn't actually have the what. So we're saying, let's build the what, and that is a binding global agreement ultimately, right? We need there to be accountability, but we also need multiple stakeholders to feel like they're a part of building that. Because if they don't feel like they're a part of building that, they're not going to get behind it, and it's just not going to be sustainable. So one of the things I'm working on, if it's helpful to share, is that the economic side of it, right? Like, there are a number of countries that, came up in this bifurcation or this polarized debate around the transition roadmap at COP. And because I've played quite a specific role in the negotiations, I was talking to a lot of those countries on both sides. Those countries, there are the disingenuous players, but then there are the countries who are dealing with major debt crises, not able to get capital investment into renewables projects. And instead of leapfrogging into renewables, which they could do, like the science tells us it's possible, they're being sold fossil fuel projects that are giving them a kind of a sense of not only security, even though it's not necessarily true, energy security for their communities, but that there are other states that are there for them, who are going to trade with them, who are going to work with them. They're not being left alone. And many of those states are petro-states who are going and having those conversations with them. So what we need to do as part of the initiative is to build mechanisms, working with finance, working with business, working with governments, civil society and others, that can remove those barriers to investment. And we've done that with Colombia, for example, the country. They have developed a plan for their fossil fuel transition. They're the 5th biggest coal exporter in the world. So they've developed a pathway, and now they're asking investors to come and invest in them. Obviously, it's been very difficult in the past because of the reasons that I mentioned before. So we've been having active conversations with investors and others about the risk. What is the real risk that there is in investing in countries that are looking at the future of life itself, which is what they're talking about, and actually coming up with plans to do that. So we've got mechanisms that we're working on addressing debt, a debt resolution facility. We've got mechanisms that we're working on the financing piece, how to ensure the financing can move to different countries so they can actually put these plans in place. And in the longer term, of course, there will have to be mechanisms that are going to be built around accountability, transparency, grievance mechanisms, and so on. I don't have time to talk about that now. I just think what I would like to say is different, possibly, about us, is that we're both bottom-up and top-down. So the idea emerged not only from Pacific leaders in Pacific states, but also from civil society. So we now work not only with 18 countries who've endorsed the idea of a fossil fuel treaty, who are working with us on some of these ideas for mechanisms, but also over 4,200 organizations, almost 200 cities, numerous. I could talk forever. We've got a million people who've signed up to the idea. And so another, key partner in this is business and finance, and super happy to be here with our partner, the Global Alliance on Banking on Values, because this is we're really going to need the financial sector to be able to support this. So we believe that change is possible, and we're doing our best to be the change that we want to see in the world. And it's not easy. It's difficult. It requires us having difficult conversations, but taking the polarization out of it. So we're not judging the fossil fuels of the past. They were there for a reason. But what we're saying is we need to now make a transition away from them, and we need to do that in a way which has empathy and an actual solid plan, rather than just kind of putting our heads in the sand and hoping that this is going to get fixed by somebody. Thank you.
Thank you, Amiera. Very thoughtful. And looking at some of the things that you highlighted, we have you, Anne-Sophie, to contribute with the corporate and finance perspective and all the things that you do. Please.
Thank you. And indeed, I'm the bank around the table. But I'm also a bank that is convinced that indeed we have science, and science is leading our actions. And that's why we want to continue doing what we were doing for the past years. In 2025, maybe to start about what we've done recently, we were the first global systemic bank with targets approved by SBTi, so the Science Based Target Initiative. So just confirming that what we are doing is science-based and is the right thing to do. So that was quite a milestone, and very happy to have that at our credit. Next to that, we've continued to make progress in the DNA of the bank, which is financing. We are a big financing institution. Our balance sheet is 1 trillion euro. And by the way, we are Dutch, but we are active mostly in Europe, and we have also activities in the US and in Asia. And what we do is financing clients. And what we are building now is ability to scale projects that are part of the transition. So we have created a transition accelerator team that is really looking at how to accelerate some of those projects where the technology is just at the point of becoming mature enough so as to take over from fossil fuel. And I will come back to that at a later stage. And the third thing we do, and we will continue doing, is engaging with our clients. Because stepping away from one day to another doesn't have a real impact. What has impact is supporting the transformation of the economy. And this is really at the core of what we are doing. We are looking at our clients, analyzing your disclosure, building your view on your transition plan, and engaging. And we make sure that our bankers are able to have the right conversation year after year, and indeed monitor the progress those clients are making. We do that because we consider that the transition, again, cannot happen from one day to another. Unplugging the economy from fossil fuel is going to take time, effort, and that's not easy. Today, we are still 80% dependent on fossil fuel. And that's what we want to foster by financing and building an alternative infrastructure. So we dedicate a lot of our funding to that part. We've taken the insight, and our methodologies are built from, originally, this is the IPCC, and behind that, that's the International Energy Agencies that is I would say, sketching those scenarios. And we've taken those insights and from COP in Dubai, where IEA was very clear about the acceleration required for renewable, and we've committed to follow that. And that's why last year we've reached 7.5 billion of funding during the year only to the renewable sector. Basically, we've tripled our commitment in 3 years. That transition requires the transformation of a system. So this is not something one single party can do alone. So we see ourselves as a participant to that system, and we really look into how to collaborate with others so as to get there. Collaborate with CS, also so civil society organization, collaborate with our clients, with regulators. I mean, banks are heavily regulated. So all that, and our peers, because indeed I spend also a lot of time with our peers so as to share approach, methodologies, and views. I'm part of the UNEP-5, so United Nations Environmental Programme for Finance and Institution Banking Board, and where we discussed about the progress we make, but also the struggle we face. Because we face quite some struggle, but the good news, and in spite of that, I would say, context that is complicated these days, what we see is that our clients are keeping the good work. And that's quite reassuring, frankly. That's a question we were asking ourselves 18 months ago when we started seeing that shift. And I remember New York Climate Week in 24 with those conversations with some parties where I came back to Europe very, very concerned, and it's only deteriorated since then. But we've monitored what our large corporates are doing. And frankly, they are not changing. They are not changing the course of what they are doing either, because they see the risk, they see the importance and what's happening in your value chain. So that's very reassuring. And those large corporates, they have taken medium to long-term decision in terms of strategy, and they are extremely happy that we continue pushing them and accompanying them in that direction. Another point, very important, is that those transitions have a lot of impact on people. And ultimately, we are not doing that only to save the planet. We are doing that for society. And I would say transforming the system, we really need to put people in the middle and ensure that that transition is also beneficial to the people. So this is really something that we put in the middle of our analysis so as to ensure that the social dimension and the ripple effect on people is taken on board when we finance a new system. And finally, we see the complexity, so we want to engage even more with policymakers. We have dedicating much more time than before in understanding what can help that transformation to accelerate, basically identifying the stick and the carrots that are needed so as to really continue moving forward. So much more time spent with governments, with again, decision maker, so as to feed them with insight and with what our clients are telling us and to our support, so as to support your transformation.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. Yes. So Martin, looking at you and what you do.
So really great to be here in Davos, and also very interesting listening to all of you. And it's true what you're saying, Ingmar. I think there's a lot of negativity out there, and there's a lot of destructive discourse. Having said that, I think I'm very privileged because I work for an organization called the Global Alliance for Banking and Values. We are a movement of over 70 banks in more than 45 countries around the world, which is really putting people and planet at the center of everything they do. They're not working in finance for the profit primarily, but really to have a social and an environmental impact. And I also have the privilege that I'm in touch every day with people from literally around the world. Our movement goes all the way from Bolivia to Norway and from Canada to Papua New Guinea. And so I hear what's happening in those parts of the world as well. And then when I look at the media and I see Mr. Trump and I hear all those views and opinions from around the world, there's a huge disconnect. And I think that gives me at least a lot of energy and also hope that change still is possible in the world. Now, what does the GABV do? We are bringing our members together at the level of the chief executives as well as at the level of the non-executive directors to talk about values in finance and how they can strengthen their business models so that they're really focusing on what they want to achieve, whether this is financial inclusion, whether this is reducing climate change, whether this is promoting SMEs in their markets. We do this through various ways. We have workshops, we have peer events, we have leadership development programs. We also connect them with funders, investors, and expert organizations. And more recently, we've actually also started to engage and work with policymakers and regulators, as well as with mainstream banks that are starting to get interested in a different angle to their sustainability strategy, because they want to better understand how could they put more emphasis on the values in their business strategy. Now, our members, many of our members from the very start have been operating with very strict exclusion criteria. And so probably they are not really that much engaged in the first place in the fossil fuel economy. They also have the benefit that very often their owners, the investors, they are invested because exactly that reason. They want to put their money where it has a positive impact, rather where they can have the maximum return for their investment. And that gives them, of course, a much different room to act and to try things out and to innovate. And we see ourselves really as the kind of innovators that can try out things that maybe large banks like ING might not be able to do so easily. And then hopefully, eventually, when we find the transformative solutions, we can either ourselves scale them up, but also share them with the wider financial industry so they can pick those also up and work with those. In the climate space, we've been, since 2019, we had launched a GABV climate change commitment and started a partnership with the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which is standard methodology for greenhouse gas accounting. We were the ones that were helping PCAF to become a global initiative, and today, in the meantime, there's more than 700 financial institutions from around the world, and actually including ING, that have signed up to PCAF. So we've been partnering with them to move forward this notion of really measuring also your greenhouse gas emissions and setting targets to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. And we're also a very natural partner, as we heard from Amiera, for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, in the sense that we were able to bring 25 member banks that have signed up or signed on, because the treaty doesn't exist yet. The goal is to create the treaty, have signed on to supporting this. We're the first global network of banks that have signed on. Now, the title today is really to look at also what are the benefits of being front runners, what are the benefits of being proactive rather than defensive when it comes to moving into a post-fossil fuel economy. And I think what we see in our membership of values-based banks is that there are a lot of benefits in many different ways. To begin with, by being really coherent and consequent in our actions, our members are building a lot of credibility, and they can use that credibility, they can leverage that to engage with policymakers and regulators on these topics. They can use that also by building client loyalty, which again gives them tangible financial advantages in terms of financial resilience, better asset and liability profiles, etc., etc. They are also more keenly acute about the climate risks that their clients are facing. Our members are all really deeply grounded in the communities they serve, and so they very quickly see when the communities are being impacted by the climate change impact. And so they start working with those clients to help them adapt, to help them reduce the risks, maybe through insurance products and other means. And that again then has an impact on their default rates. So there's a lot of really tangible benefits that our members are seeing. Now, having said that, and I think Anne-Sophie has also spoken to that, I think there's also a huge opportunity, a commercial opportunity out there. So to just take maybe one example, Triodos Bank in the Netherlands, they have been the lead arranger in number of renewable energy transactions over the past couple of years. So they're really going deep into that space. They have a huge expertise, and they are developing a lot of new projects to help with renewable energy. So I think that's a very beautiful example to show again this commercial opportunity that is also out there. We're not in it per se just to make a lot of profit, but we also, of course, want to be resilient financially in the long term, and for that we also need to see the commercial opportunity, and we're really digging into that as well.
Very interesting, thank you. And thank you also for segueing into the next part of the conversation, where we're to look more at the opportunities, but also, of course, explore how can we overcome the challenges and obstacles that we actually really have here. It's a long journey. I've been in this world since COP3 in Kyoto, and sometimes when I look in media, it feels like, yeah, we're still writing the same stories, but underline, there is a lot of things that has happened since. So looking a bit more on both challenges and opportunities and how we can act. Ingmar, looking at science and the evidence, how can we come through? Can you elaborate a little bit on the thoughts that you started earlier?
So we created this campaign, Make Science Great Again, and that is to get people aware about two things. Number one, science are currently under attack, and that's very dangerous. Number two, the reason for it is not because we are losing, it's because we are winning. It's because science works and it's powerful. And that is key, I believe, because if we need to break through this resistance and it's powerful people working against the green transition and a fossil-free future. I mean, they even invaded the neighbor country to Colombia and threatening to invade Colombia, where this fossil fuel phase-out conference are hopefully going to be hosted. I mean, will it be hosted if it's a war? Probably not. So this is what we're up to. I mean, Donald Trump is like an oil CEO with an army. That's really dangerous. So we need to take we need to stand up and do a lot of things that are quite risky. All of us needs to get out of our comfort zone and challenge those that are resisting us. And of course, it's very hard to do it if you're in a country that is not free, like United States. It's a much bigger risk. But I mean, Donald Trump, he's coming here and saying that, okay, the only reason I'm going to Davos, but you need to cut everything that is woke on the agenda. We shouldn't do that. I mean, come on. The risk is that it's getting a little bit uncomfortable. When he was presented on stage yesterday, no one challenged him. Come on. I mean, we don't need to say something rude, but we can say something like, I believe in science, Mr. President. Maybe you don't. I don't know. So we need to get out of our comfort zone. But here's my main point. It's a risk of doing that. And people are only willing to take risk if they believe it's worth it. When do we believe it's worth it? When we are convinced that we are winning. And the climate movement, all of us, needs to be a winner. Because we are on the right side of the history. We will win. And we have that in all the stats and what we're talking about here. The fossil fuel future, those that are building that are the winners. But we need to believe in it. And the other side, they do everything they can to try to get people to give up. Don't let them do that.
Thanks a lot. continue with you, Amiera. You've been going on with this for 5 years, a bit more. Can you please tell me about both the progress that you've done, but also the obstacles and opportunities you see going forward, and what your focus is now?
Sure. So as I sort of quickly ran over before, the idea emerged actually from different places. It emerged from academics who were looking at supply-side policies on fossil fuels. It emerged from Pacific leaders. It emerged from activists like the chair and founder of the Fossil Fuel Treaty, Zipporah Berman, and others. So this idea for a binding agreement on addressing fossil fuels was there, circulating, but nobody had really put it out there with a bang, you know. So about 5 years ago, Zipporah and others decided to do that, to really challenge, particularly the fact that the biggest space for negotiating, or at least the biggest formal negotiating space for addressing climate change, is the UNFCCC space, and at that point, fossil fuels, which is, we all know, the major driver of the climate crisis, was not even in the text. So all of the, games of the fossil fuel lobby, we all know now, have been around for a very long time. So we sort of came with a bang. I only joined 3 years ago, but I was witnessing this happening in my other role. It was amazing, and it really challenged the space. And it said, we need to start addressing the root cause of the problem. But we were seen as quite radical. We were seen as these crazy activists just talking about something that's totally unrealistic. And that has been a thread consistently throughout this. But it's not that, what we've done is we worked with a lot of people who've actually been involved actively in successful treaties. And so we've got that expertise. We've analysed what worked, what didn't work. And we're learning a lot from the past. And those people were also told, you're crazy, this will never happen. So I think it's really important to note that we've come a massive way. We still have detractors, for sure, we do. There's no doubt about it. But we're not willing to kind of put our head in the sand and step back and say, this is too hard. We're saying, we're going to do it. We're going to put our energy behind it, and we're going to make it a big tent, because we can't do this alone. No country in the world can do this alone. No business can do it alone. No, science can't operate on their own. So we need to come together. So I think that the belief in our vision and our energy is starting to build, because we now have 18 countries on board. I mean, some of these countries, when we first spoke to them, were not able to engage with us. And why? Because they felt, do you understand the challenges we face? Do you understand that how difficult it is for us to get investment into this renewable transition, to economically diversify? Do you understand how unfair the global macroeconomy is? And we're like, yes, we do. And we're going to go away and do work with key partners and understand it more. And we're going to come back to you with proposals. And that's what we do. We come back with proposals. And we work with, for example, we're doing a lot on debt because it's such a huge barrier. If I just give an example of the African continent, right, it has the greatest renewable energy potential in the world, but it's had less than 3% of the investment globally. 85% of the investment into renewable energy, although it might have shifted since that stat was released about 2 years ago, but probably not significantly. 85% has gone to the global north in China at interest rates of 2 to 6%. But the weighted cost of capital investment, the interest rate across the African continent is 15.6%. So how on earth do we expect countries in a continent that's public debt has doubled in the last 5 years to over $1 trillion to be able to make those choices? It's not even a choice, right? For them, they have to serve the interests of their populations. So we're saying, okay, we're going to speak to debt experts, and particularly from the global south when it comes to those countries, because we need to show that we respect the expertise emerging out of the south as well, right? Because there is a knowledge production issue. This is one of the reasons why, again, I come from a climate science background, have a PhD in it. One of the reasons that we're not trusted always is because of our positionality. People think, well, they're sitting in their ivory tower telling us to sort our lives out, and they don't understand the challenges we face. So the knowledge production piece is really important, that we speak to experts from all different backgrounds when we're talking to countries that face the biggest barriers and develop solutions accordingly. I think the other thing that's happening, and that we have the privilege of being able to do, because we have such a wide civil society network, including partners here, is that we can be bold. You know what I mean? We can be whatever we call the radical flank or whatever. And I know that because I see it in the negotiations on these topics, that does create more political space for leaders to say, hey, hang on, yeah, okay, maybe there's something in this roadmap that we need from fossil fuels, but it also has to be just and equitable. And we're going to get behind this if it is just and equitable, and that's something that we're talking about. I think the final thing that's really exciting that Ingmar mentioned before is countries that are willing to step up now and take leadership positions in this conversation, even those that haven't necessarily endorsed the treaty proposal yet, but they're willing to drive the conversation forward on how you actually make this work plan happen. So, for example, the conference that was mentioned, this is going to be at the end of April in Santa Marta, Colombia, which is a very significant symbolic place for fossil fuels in the country historically, because a lot of the production was done there. This is Colombia and the government of the Netherlands are co-hosting the first ever diplomatic conference on the just transition away from fossil fuels. What is that going to be about? That's going to be about talking about those barriers, talking about the opportunities, what needs to change, what can we do? And it's outside of the UNFCCC space deliberately because it creates more space for really getting into the nitty-gritty, the challenge, the opportunities, the partnerships. And so that's going to be, currently the agenda for that. The Colombians and the Dutch government are actively seeking, consulting with various stakeholders, including business, financiers and others, about what should be, the way that we go about having this conversation. And it's going to include tracks on economics, the economic side, tracks on energy access, which is a major concern for many, many governments, and also tracks on the kind of international cooperation and the legal responsibility side. Because let's not forget that the International Court of Justice has now given an advisory opinion that climate justice is a responsibility of states, and they specifically name fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies. So states are actually they have an international legal responsibility now for the first time ever to address fossil fuels. And you will be aware there's lots of court cases emerging, right? And this is only going to strengthen the resistance. So I would encourage everyone to engage with the conference if you can, or keep an eye on it. Feel free to ask questions. There are many of us who are involved in one way or another. And yeah, I think that's going to be a really productive space. Thanks.
And very soon. Very good. Going to you, Anne-Sophie, you already highlighted both the role that you take with your clients, helping them co-creating and leading the transition, but also how you collaborate with other stakeholders, institutions, etc. So could you highlight a few more opportunities and challenges going forward that you see that we need to overcome and that we can explore together, and what is needed to do that?
Yeah, and maybe starting with the opportunities, because this is how we look at things. We see that transition as requiring a massive, I would say, amount of financing. There are many studies that have been done on that topic, but I think that there's a sort of consensus around 4 to 5 trillion of additional capex that are required if we want to get to the targets we've set for decarbonizing and ultimately being net zero. So this is massive, and that needs financing. So that's for also banks to think, okay, what can we do and what kind of role can we play? I refer to renewable. I can talk also about infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of needs also, and to decarbonize, we need to build more capacity for the grid, for instance, but we need also to organize a new system. And for instance, we finance EV charging infrastructure that needs to be in place so as for the electrification of the automotive sector to be happening. So this is really for us as a financier, something on which we want to play a role, understanding those technologies and discussing with our clients how to get there. But indeed, that's not completely easy. And in terms of challenge, this is, as I said, the complexity of having very many stakeholders who need to play a role. That's why we really work on collaborative approach. We have, for instance, designed new approaches to determine how banks can decarbonize their books. We've been involved in the Poseidon principle for the shipping industry. We've designed or co-designed the sustainable aluminium financing framework. So for each of those heavy emitting industries or sector, we've helped and we've provided resources so as to together with experts in those sectors, together with scientists, really think what can be the realistic pace of that transformation. And this is really required. And now we are using those insights to discuss with policymakers, really trying to pinpoint what are the specific actions. One key example, for instance, is the work we've done on decarbonizing the residential real estate sector. Because indeed we talk a lot about the big industries, but I mean we are all citizens, and many of us have a home, and emissions coming from those homes need also actions. But the complexity is that in each country, the quality of the real estate is very different. How energy is brought into house is different. So we need to think that through, and in the various markets where we operate, understand what can have impact, because ultimately this is about impact. So we want to provide financing, but also we want to discuss with peers, with governments, with regulators, how we can accelerate that. What is useful? What is the incentive that works in the context in which those customers are located? So this is really what is making us busy, but indeed we are happy to take the flag and advocate for that.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Yes. And I'm inviting you also to tell a bit about what you see going forward. And you can think about if you have any questions, because after that we'll invite a few questions and then in 50 minutes conclude. Please, Martin.
Yeah, I was struck by the remark you made, Ingmar, around you only kind of go in attack mode when you can judge the risks and know how far you can go. And it made me think about different models I see around and challenges I see, and opportunities also I see around our network. So to take the example of our member in Bangladesh, BRAC Bank. In Bangladesh, there was a very oppressive regime, and they made a point of always being apolitical, just doing the right thing, focusing on the impact, focusing on financial inclusion. They were also doing climate work, climate-related work. Bangladesh is a country that's heavily affected by climate change. But they weren't making a big point about it. And then when the revolution happened in Bangladesh and there was the regime change, what happened was that most of the other banks that were dealing with the former government imploded. And today, BRAC Bank is the largest bank in Bangladesh because all the money went to that bank. And just as a case in point, to show the opportunity of doing the right thing. Another case that I wanted to bring to this room is our other member, Climate First Bank. They're sitting in Florida. And I think when I say Florida, you can imagine what the political context is. They are a startup bank that within 4 years grew to $1.5 billion in assets. And in the last years, they've put solar roofs on 80,000 homes within 3 years. I mean, it's absolutely impressive what they have achieved. Again, in a very challenging environment, as you can imagine, they just veered forward and went ahead. And then maybe the final case is speaking to also what Anne-Sophie mentioned. Our member banks can do as much as they can do within the frameworks and the situations and contexts that they're operating in. But if we can get the policymakers to make those changes, we could all go so much faster. So this collaborative piece with the policymakers and regulators, but also with educating consumers and clients to take the right decisions is absolutely crucial, especially in the residential area, for example. If you don't have the right building codes in place, you are fighting windmills as a bank. You cannot really move very far. You can maybe work with the most convinced consumers, but it would make such a big difference. And ultimately, I think it's also in the interest of governments to have those building codes in place, because it would also create a much bigger independence of the fossil fuel economy with all the benefits, the political benefits that you will eventually reap as a government.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to invite questions from the audience, and I think we'll have space for 2, 3. Can I have some? What?
26 minutes to go.
26 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, are you aha, I thought we ended 11:45.
Yes, actually, Anne-Sophie has to leave at 11:45.
Okay, yes. So yes, let's go to the questions.
Hi, I'm Richard Tarperton from the World Resources Institute. Thank you for all those really inspiring ideas, and it's great to see so much progress being made in tackling this issue around how to transition from fossil fuels. I've been in the banking sector for the last 5 years, and we've been trying, when I was in banking, I'm now in the NGO sector, but previously in the banking sector, we were trying to get transition finance to flow. And it's flowing in some areas, like renewable energy, electric vehicles, and batteries. But in key sectors that need to transition, like food, heavy industry, steel, aluminium, cement, the business case is a lot stronger, and the financial return tends to be in double-digit figures for high-carbon products. But for low-carbon versions of those products, low-carbon steel, low-carbon aluminium, the business case is almost zero, in some cases negative. And my question is mostly, I guess, to Anne-Sophie from ING, as to what you were saying, you're keen to get more transition finance to flow through ING's work, what you're doing in the space. What do you see as being the key actions that are needed that banks and industry can take to make it more possible for those financial cases to turn positive?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. For some sectors, I mean, things are moving and we are more or less on the right direction. For other sectors, and evident industry is a good example, it's much more complex. And our clients are coming to us saying, yeah, we share the views, but the business case is not there. So it doesn't make any sense. I'm a listed company. I cannot go to my board and get approval for those projects that are far less profitable or that requires much more investment than the current situation, where indeed I'm working based on let's say, connected to fossil fuel industries. So this is typically the work we are doing in specific sectors, engaging then with policymakers. Yesterday, I was in discussion, for instance, with Wopke Hoekstra, who is the commissioner in charge of energy, and who is very keen and very open to hearing our insights. So when it comes to the role of EIB, for instance, to complement the role of banks so as to de-risk them and to facilitate access to, cheaper funding, or when it comes to indeed designing the right incentive or the right regulatory limitation for some sectors, this is what we need. I mean, again, we need more regulation. We need governments basically to step in. They have committed to the Paris goals. So they have to put the right economic system in place so as to get there. Otherwise, indeed, that's very difficult for the private sectors, and in particular for listed clients, to make those trade-offs. They can do that marginally, but when it comes to the core of their activity, that's much more complex. So we are really deep diving now, and we are deep diving on sectors where we have a significant market share. For some sectors, we are less relevant, but for instance, shipping is a very good example. We have identified what can really help decarbonizing the shipping sector, and now we have work stream working on where we can play a role and how to get there. When it can be indeed using different types of alternative fuels, for instance, and who can be a partner there, or it can be indeed how to, I would say, create a less risky ecosystem of financing for our peers also to join us in that direction. So this is heavy, this is not super sexy, but this is necessary at this stage.
Martin, you wanted to?
Yeah, maybe if I just can bring in an example from the Global South, and thanks for the question. I think it's a very important question. At the end of the day, banks are all regulated, and even the values-based banks, they have maybe a little bit more room than banks that are listed on the stock market to do things that are maybe not quite as profitable, but there's a limit. So ultimately, there's also a need for governments to step in and provide blended finance, and we're seeing that already now. It's maybe easier in the global south, where you have the development finance institutions and also the multilateral development institutions that come in with concessional finance, for example, to help transform agricultural practices, where you really need to have this collaboration and a systems approach rather than just a transactional approach that runs by itself.
Thank you very much. We have
hello.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. My question is for Martin, please, because you mentioned Bolivia as an example and the Global South, and I'm from Bolivia, and I'm leading Amazon Biodiversity Preservation Initiative with top innovators. So my question is, how would you define a new economy for a country like Bolivia? How is this transition possible for a country that is so rich but has a very poor sustainable chip right now? Corporations, organizations, is a mess. So please, thank you.
That's a very big question. I don't dare to answer it because I'm sure you know more about Bolivia, or 100 times more than I do. What I can say is that you probably know Banco Sol, which is our member there. They're really one of the leaders in microfinance and financial inclusion, and they've reached a size at this point that of maturity that they're really able to be a leader and a lighthouse also for other financial institutions in Bolivia. They are working with their clients on finding climate-friendly solutions, helping them adapt, helping them mitigate risks. But ultimately, again, I think it needs to be a multi-stakeholder effort, but I wouldn't dare tell you how Bolivia needs to go on that path, but maybe we can speak about that offline afterwards.
Thank you. Do we have any? Yeah, over there.
Hi, yes, thank you. Dominic Frangillo from Elected Officials to Protect America. Thank you for the panel. This has been incredibly insightful. I did have a question for Amiera. We've been coordinating with the Fossil Fuel Treaty. We've organized 1,200 elected officials, subnational leaders from 47 states in the U.S. calling for international cooperation to phase out fossil fuels. I was really struck by your comments about the empathy needed in talking with countries to understand the reality about what does this mean in terms of attracting investment and diversifying their economies. And we're finding, frankly, some of the same conversations in subnational jurisdictions, states like New Mexico and the Permian Basin, where legislators see the funds from oil and gas going to fund schools. And the conversations, the sensitive conversations they're having as the fossil fuel industry is pushing back from some of the educational work that we've done, doing toxic tours, showing the health impacts. So my question is two-part. What made the difference for those 18 countries that have now signed on and support? What did you go back to them that convinced them, okay, now is the time to really support this initiative? And the second is, how can we collaborate to bring subnational leaders from legislators from the United States, like California and New Mexico, other oil-producing jurisdictions to the Columbia event?
And sorry for interrupting. I'd like to just invite Anne-Sophie to say a few words before you have to leave, and then we can go back to your question. So just if you bring anything from this conversation, what would that be, and what insights do you take with you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super nice way to end up Davos for me today, because, I mean, we cannot just give up. All the indication we have is that climate change is there, that the situation is just accelerating. I mean, as a bank, and looking at, I'm originally a banker, I'm then a risk manager, I see the risk for our own organization, for our clients, just going up. And that's a big concern. So we want to play a role there. and I think that's a common opportunity. I think one item on which I think we need to do better, this is on bringing that narrative to citizens. Because for the moment, the buying from society is not there. When we look at how citizens vote, this is very concerning. So on that, I think we've all failed, and we need to rethink on how to market the topic and the importance of the topic to make it sexy and accessible, but also something that people really want to contribute to, because people want to take action. And when they are brought together in, okay, you can make the difference, I think they can be very motivated. So this is for me on my to-do list for this year.
Thank you so much. And thank you for contributing to this conversation. Safe trip home. And now back.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to remember your questions, but firstly, thank you so much for all the work you do, especially in the contexts, the multiple contexts within the US that you're working in. What made the difference? I think there's a slight nuance in every case. Every single time there's been a really strong push from not just civil society, but civil society have been critical, but also other key champions, business leaders, scientists, celebrities even. So this feeling of kind of a building consensus that they want to see their leaders step up. The other thing, and I'm aware of this personally just because I've been involved in those, is like bringing tailored holistic economic analysis. So looking at the full cost of fossil fuels, right? You mentioned health. There's not just the impact on just the worst part of that, which is mortality rates, lived experience of health. There's also economic costs on the health system and so on. So I think sometimes we get specific questions and we go back, and we usually go back with an expert from that country who's done some analysis that we've supported, and that they're able to present it to their own decision makers and say, look, actually, this is way more expensive if you continue down this track. But I do think you raise a very important point about the empathy. Like, we all have to speak to each other on a human-to-human level. And I think we've struggled a little bit because, and again, I come from this activist researcher background, like you want to scream and say, like, why aren't you bloody just, you want to do that. And I've definitely done that a lot in the past. But when I went into that research where you're actually just talking to people who are like, it's rubbish, or like, I'm never going to listen to a lefty tree hugger who eats beans. That was what Boris Johnson said, by the way, in his speech. Do you remember when he talked about bean tree huggers? He came around eventually to believing in climate change. So I think you have to start from a position of, we're all in this together, and we don't have to have the exact same set of political views to agree that we have something going on that's affecting ordinary people's lives, future generations. And I know from research that the way that works is there are certain central values that really work, and we have to adapt our narratives accordingly. The value of fairness, I believe in justice, but the value, when you talk about fairness, it works a lot better generally in most of the world. When you talk about, what future do we want for the future generations, our own families? You know, we want them to thrive. We don't want them to be suffering because of decisions we've made. And so I think that works. And then in terms of the conference itself, the conference is being organized by Colombia in the Netherlands. And of course, it's so much bigger than the Fossil Fuel Treaty. The Fossil Fuel Treaty will fall under one of the tracks, but it's much broader than that. Very importantly, because we need a really big, broad conversation with as many stakeholders as possible. I understand that there will be a website launched and hopefully some mode of engagement, expressions of interest and things like that possibly might be there. But it's a very dynamic process at the moment because it was just announced at COP. But definitely we can have a chat about what we know, the Fossil Fuel Treaty, and Irene, the minister from Colombia who's leading a lot of this now, and Daniela, who's another key stakeholder you'll know of. We held a webinar just before Christmas, which is on our YouTube, which explained at least where the thinking was at that time in terms of how folks could get involved. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we have one question more, and then we need to wrap up and conclude. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Justin Bogdansky. I'm at Sadara Incorporated. I'm really intrigued with accountability. And one thing that Amiera, you spoke to was financing and debt relief. And while those really help reduce the friction on the way to reducing and achieving goals, I'm really curious about how to increase accountability for corporations, but then also individuals and governments. Of course, this is a big question, so we'll probably only cover some of this. And then how do we do that without scaring others away from setting goals in the first place or having them really be ambitious enough? And then even on the individual level, where governments and corporations might have a lot of pressure, which of course is important because they'll make the biggest impacts. But on an individual level, you know, with your friends and family and things like that, how should we best hold each other accountable for having the conversations, putting the right pressure on the right people to then make the necessary changes that we need?
That's an amazing question, and as you've all observed, I talk a lot, so I won't be able to answer all of it, but happy to have a chat. So with regards to the kind of idea of a global work plan, accountability and transparency are two critical elements. The thinking on that is it's underway and it's evolving precisely because we need all the stakeholders involved to want to have certain mechanisms on accountability and transparency. So we need to have a lot of conversations. We did a mapping last year on, for example, potential safeguarding mechanisms, which underneath would include things like accountability. So for example, if you're a member of this initiative, there will be benefits. So one of the things I didn't get the chance to talk about is like mutually beneficial trade relationships between importers and exporters or consumers and producers who can plan a phase down over time and have, mutual benefits. But that also is going to come with responsibility, right? So how do we ensure that the stakeholders involved comply with what they've committed to? And there are certain mechanisms we'll have to develop, and there are many we can learn from already within the EU, for example, within human rights mechanisms, within other treaties. So we're looking at those. Transparency is another piece, which, you know, a lot of the deals that get made related to fossil fuels, even related to debt as an issue, are done under the cover of darkness. The terms and conditions are not necessarily fair. That's part of the reason why we have escalating crisis, because there's no ability to hold states, businesses and others accountable if there's no transparency on the deals and things that they're making. And sometimes that involves kind of undue pressure on certain stakeholders. So there would have to be some form of transparency. And there are examples of transparency that are useful to learn from. There's, for example, the Extractives Industries Transparency Initiative. So we're looking at that. What can we learn? Is that something we would want states to comply with if they're part of this? And then there's, of course, the mechanisms for non-state actors to raise grievances or concerns, for example, potentially have a seat at the table in some of the conversations. There's a lot of work we need to do to explore that. So again, it's really, we're in this massive consultation mode. We want as many ideas as possible, what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked. So really open, please reach out. On how you hold people in your life accountable. One of the things I worked on in the last role I did, which I'll have to see if it's up to date because it's been a few years, was literally a toolkit on like how to talk to your family and friends about the climate crisis. Like one of the things I wanted to work on, because I was working with some folks in the finance sector, was like how to talk to boards and shareholders about this. And so I think there's some tools and guidance out there, but again, the world has like really, some of the polarization has ramped up. So I can have a look at some of the organizations who work on that stuff and see if they've done anything. I'm sure they've done some really awesome stuff. And a lot of it is based on evidence, you know, active research with people. So I do think polling and engagement, or like, I should say communications and engagement, are two very different things. And often when we're trying to understand, or we put communication strategies out, they're often based on these kind of on polls, but they're not based on like research processes that engage people in the action that they're going to take. So we can often, I will do it. I'll say, I believe in this, I'm going to do it. And then when I'm acting out my daily life,
Amiera,
I'll cut corners. I'm talking too much. Sorry. I told her to tell me to be quiet. So I'll share some details with you. Thanks.
A well of knowledge here, as you can see. So I'd like to conclude, and I just want to highlight briefly the themes that I've seen been highlighted here. Both, put people in the center, put the possible futures in the center, but also don't neglect where we are. We really need to take it from here and go forward and create and reinforce those partnerships that we already have, but also explore. Last week I started to read Kahane's book. I don't remember the exact title, if it's Collaborate with Your Enemy. I'm not looking at enemies, but just reinforce our ability to collaborate where we don't always agree, to find that friction that actually will help innovation and help fuel that future society and economy. So with that, I'd like to ask all of you to just name one insight, one takeaway, or one ask you have to your fellow panelists from here in one sentence.
In one sentence?
In one sentence, maybe two.
We have 6 minutes. I do a few sentences.
Yes.
I think the main thing we need to achieve here, we need to create winners. It's a risky business to form a fossil fuel treaty. I mean, your colleague that were supposed to sit in your seat, he was arrested in India because the police there thought that they were interfering with energy independence in India. And he's not an activist, he's a policy, UN person. I mean, it's not like someone gluing himself on the street. That's what we're up to. And Colombia, very bold oil country, one of the first members of the fossil fuel treaty that have their own oil. I mean, it's not so impressive if Sweden joined the fossil fuel treaty because we have no oil. I would like that to happen. But Colombia, that's bold. So we need to create winners if they do this risky business. So I think those countries and like Colombia, I want to buy the oil we still need to use from them, so that we create winners of the bold people on the other side that wants to phase out fossil fuel. So create winners are my last sentence. Here, not forever.
I feel I've said a lot, so I'm going to pass and give the space to Martin. Thanks.
That's very sneaky. I think for me, really, in this time of upheaval and where nothing seems to be like it used to be, I think my message really to everyone is, don't despair and focus on the positive and focus on where you can actually act. I really enjoyed this panel because we have such a diverse panel, and yet I think we're all fighting for the same thing and in the space that we're in. And so always be aware of the space you're in and what you can do in that space. I think also I like the question the gentleman said before, how can you really get people, create that understanding of people's situation. And I think this, one thing we practice in the Global Alliance for Banking and Values is really listening to each other. We spend a lot of time in CEO conversations, just listening what has the other one experienced. And it's always surprising to see how much you can learn just by listening, and then come up actually at the end with much better solutions. So I guess that's my message to you all.
Thank you so much. And I'm asking you to, while we conclude here, think about the one thing you take with you and maybe bring that out of this box here, and in the next conversation you have with someone, what can you take? What next steps can you take to enable this transition? And
perhaps move the money to a bank that have values.
Move the money to the bank that have values. And for my side, it's about determination and curiosity to create those crocodile economies, both when it comes to countries and companies, but also when looking at citizens. How can citizens find the well-being in this future that we're creating? With that, I want to thank the speakers, also including Anne-Sophie, who had to leave earlier, and also the arrangers and organizers of this seminar, which is Global Alliance on Banking and Values, and too many words, I'm sorry, Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. and we don't have time. And Green Up.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
very
and
much.
thank you to the audience.
Thank you, Katharina, and thank you to all the speakers for the engaging discussion today. And if I may, I also have a personal takeaway from this session. So for me, it was really about learning. We have this huge, despite the huge disconnect that we have, we actually have heard from a global bank, ING, that their clients are still transitioning, and that actually makes me very hopeful. And what I'm also learning is that what is critical is to preserve the integrity and transparency of our data, and that we should work really hard on doing that. And that's for me a personal takeaway. We need to act on that and also keep people accountable. And as Katharina said, when you go out of the session, there is going to be some post-it notes. So would be fantastic if you could share the main takeaways for you. We will collect all of that and publish it later on. And then finally, I would like to hand a little present to Martin for hosting this session. It's a caramel walnut tart from the local canton. Thank you, Martin.
Bündner Nusstorte. Thank you very much, Anja.
And thank you for being here. Thank you so much.